I'm speaking to you today from the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This work is based on the lands of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations, who are members of the Stolo Nation. So it's important to keep in mind this context of settler colonization as we hear this work. My name is Claire Shapton. I'm an MA student at Simon Fraser University, and I'm a co-author of this presentation. Dr. Nicholas Blomley, also of Simon Fraser University, is another author. And the first authors of this paper are the drug war survivors of Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada. This paper draws from an ongoing community-engaged research collaboration with the Abbotsford drug war survivors, a peer-based group of precariously housed people, many of whom use drugs. It is drawn from a series of interviews and focus groups with peers, reflecting on their personal experiences in securing and controlling their personal possessions, whether living outside, in shelters or supportive housing, or in private rental housing. Others, whether private or public agents, constantly steal, destroy, misplace, or seize their stuff through forms of devaluation, both of people and their possessions, and the relations that people have to their possessions. This paper has been collaboratively crafted with DWS members. Nick and I drafted several themes based on the interviews and then brought these themes back to membership. And then they identified several key themes that they wish to share here and responded to drafts of this presentation. In drafting this presentation, Nick and I draw on the experiences of DWS members, and we rely on their analyses. We're centering their words today by reading many exact quotes. And in some cases, these quotes are read by the person who recounted them to us, so that you will not only see the words of DWS members, but also hear them. The interviews were undertaken pre-COVID, and DWS points out that in many ways, the situation has actually worsened. For example, the city is no longer storing any materials seized from public property since COVID started, but instead immediately destroying them. So it's important to keep the context of this increasing violence in mind. Our research is focused on the city of Abbotsford, on the traditional lands of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations, who are members of the Stolo Nation. Abbotsford is a city of about 140,000 people and about 1 hour outside of Vancouver. It has a vacancy rate of less than 2% and an inadequate supply of affordable housing. The 2020 homelessness count reported 333 houseless people in Abbotsford, while at the time, the city had only 166 shelter beds. Many more people are not counted living in insecure rental housing or in supportive housing run by nonprofits. We frame the loss of possessions as a hum, recognizing the ongoing nature of these events. When we asked people to offer stories in relation to their stuff and the challenges they face in securing it, this was difficult because in many cases, they find it hard to offer just one account. There are just too many stories, they insist. Connie Long, one of our respondents, characterized these stories as generating a hum. People's stuff is constantly being taken from them by multiple actors, including landlords, shelter managers, police and security, bylaw officers, who are another form of law enforcement, and other precariously housed people. So as Connie explains,
there's this constant whine, like this hum in this lifestyle. And it's the same story over and over again by different people, but it's the same. Wow, oh my God, they took my stuff. Oh my God, they stole my stuff. That fucking goose stole my stuff. Can you believe it? They took my stuff. There's this constant.
People's stuff takes many forms. It can include tarps, tents, clothing, and other essentials for survival. So in this focus group conversation, people list some of the many things that they need at that moment. Losing stuff or being forced to move it all the time is problematic. So in this conversation, participants spoke about how a tent can break down when one is being forced to move it many times a day to avoid it being taken by the many actors that I mentioned. But this is not the only purpose that possessions serve. Stuff is also tied to memory, identity, and belonging. It may just be stuff, but losing some objects can be emotionally devastating. So one respondent explains, I know it's only stuff, but as the years go by, it's stuff I could never, ever get back. A DWS member, Andrea Weber, related to us.
The one thing that really, really, really hurts is losing my son's keepsake box. So all the baby momentums, like his bracelet, my bracelet from when we were in the hospital when I had him, and his, like, and all the cards that I got from, you know, being in the hospital with him and all of that stuff, and his first birthday and all the cards from that, you know, just those little things that you'll never be able to get.
And then losing photos or keepsakes can mean losing family memories and past personal histories. So both of these quotes relate to the loss of pictures, with one interviewee explaining, you can't show somebody who you were once and your history is gone. You're the only one who remembers. Connie Long also speaks about the loss of photos, saying,
when they can see the pictures and see the things that I had from back then, maybe it helps them realize, you know, where mom comes from.
Yeah.
Why mom's going through some of the things she goes through.
Losing possessions puts people at risk, furthering their precarity. So this interviewee talked about some of the ways that this can mean physical danger, saying, I mean, having to deal with the elements, you know, when it rains and stuff. A lot of these guys don't have proper tarps and stuff like that, so they get soaked. And then, you know, they're standing there frozen because, you know, they're soaked to the bone and they have no way to dry their stuff off. No place to go get warm. It's crazy, man. And how can we do that to our own brothers and sisters? Andrea also illustrates the complications that arise from a loss of personal electronics, which limits one's access to support networks.
Once you lose your numbers, we're not like kids anymore where we used to remember our friends' numbers off by hand, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Or your home or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like we all rely on our technology to remember these numbers for us.
Yes.
Once we lose we lose everything. Like contact to the whole outside world.
So those are a couple of the different ways that risk can look. Also losing medications, either prescribed or self-medication of drugs, is a medical risk. And as we edited this presentation, DWS pointed out how contaminated drug supply increases the danger of losing drugs, losing harm reduction supplies, and also losing contacts for replacing those drugs. And again, remembering the time that has elapsed since these interviews, we should keep in mind the over 2,000 people who have died of drug overdose in BC in 2020 and into 2021, and the gravity of this risk. Also, losing tools such as work boots affects opportunities for employment and safety while in these spaces of employment. Losing documents affects one's access to social services, and losing cash limits one's ability to replace all of these other lost items. Attempting to avoid the loss of possessions takes enormous effort and can entail from refraining from using important services. So for instance, an acquaintance of Connie's avoided medical care in order to keep his possessions and then lost his possessions anyway once he visited a hospital.
And he wouldn't go to hospital?
And he wouldn't go because the first time he went, he came back and all their stuff was gone. And he went up and he sat in that hospital for 5 hours just to get treated like a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And told, you can't bring your stuff in here.
No.
So he lost everything.
Another interviewee reveals the potential risk of a free meal, saying they have bylaw people that have followed people after lunch back to where their tent is, and then they take everything. So depending on the situation, to avoid the loss of possessions, people may enter shelters to avoid the seizure of possession by bylaws, even if the shelter is non-ideal in other ways. So for instance, if you can't stay with your partner in the shelter. People may also avoid shelters or supportive housing because of limitations on possessions in those spaces. So in the previous session, Marina Chavez talked about how some shelters in Abbotsford only allow you to bring in a certain limited amount of possessions. People may avoid accessing services from meals to medical care due to the risks of leaving possessions in spaces where they may be taken. And as both of these quotes illustrate. So trying to avoid the loss of possessions is a constant project and often not a successful one. Losing stuff is devastating at many levels. It can put people at risk, as these prior quotes explain, but also the harm is also emotional. So having stuff seized or destroyed can entail a devaluation of people, and this can turn on the ways in which others fail to recognize the importance of stuff to people where it's assumed to be garbage. So this is a quote from a focus group where someone said, "Something you had when you were a baby, the only thing you got to remember someone by. What is it? Oh, it's just a piece of trash." In another focus group, when asked to list the many possessions that have been lost over the years to these different regulators who seize possessions, one focus group mentioned dignity as something that could be felt to be lost. The belongings of precariously housed people are greatly important as tools for shelter, as necessities for health, as links to memories and a sense of self. Losing belongings puts people at physical and emotional risk, yet the constant hum of loss enacted by public and private agents who constantly steal, destroy, misplace, whittle, and seize stuff means that these risks are also constant.